We'll go ahead and call the Ellis County Commission meeting to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Oh, no, we have the Public Building Commission meeting first. Mr. President?
Yes. Let me start over. We'll go ahead and call the Ellis County Public Building Commission meeting to order. Thank you, Commissioner, for doing that. Please note,
Easy to
Donna,
do.
that all three board members are present. Any changes to the agenda?
I don't believe so.
Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of prior minutes, May 7th.
And they are
Any
okay.
changes other than the two that you duly noted here? Okay, we'll stand approved as presented. Consideration of accounts payable.
So, Mr. President, we do not have accounts payable this evening. If you note in your minutes, we anticipated having them tonight, but
I think we've anticipated for 2 weeks now.
yeah,
Yes.
did not get them. So, third time's charm, maybe. We'll see if we get them
I
next
hope.
Monday.
Okay. We'll move on to our project manager report.
Good evening, Project Manager Philip Smith-Haynes. On this, I do have better news. We did finally have our construction meeting last Friday, and we got a schedule from our contractor. So they are anticipating starting construction on June 4th. The good news is that they are not anticipating it to take as long as they originally thought. They
Good
are
news.
looking at about a 60-day construction schedule rather than the 90 days that they had included in their bid. So they are still planning on being out of there by the end of July. We did talk with extension staff about the fair week and what would work and not work in terms of schedules for that week and what things they could have under construction and not have under construction during that week. So
Sure.
I think things are moving forward, but won't really have much to report next week unless we do have that account payable. So.
Guess we'll take our chances and go from there. Any questions for Phil, anyone?
No.
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 Executive sessions, Phil? Yes. No. We will adjourn at 5:07, Donna. You again? We'll go ahead and call the Ellis County Public Building, Ellis County Commission meeting to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Donna, please note that all three commissioners are present this evening. Any order of business, any changes, ladies?
Not that I
Barb,
can
no.
see.
Marcy, no. Phil, no. Prior minutes of May 7th, 2018. Stand approved as presented. Then I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, items A through G.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented, items A through G.
We have a motion.
I'll second that motion.
We have a second. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Issues from persons not on the order of business this evening. I know we have one, but I think Carrie walked out with him to visit, so if we can maybe move that to later. Is that okay, ladies?
Sure.
Okay. Monthly financial report. Have you both had a chance to review?
I have
Questions?
no questions.
You said question? No questions? Okay. Barb, none?
No?
Next, we have a guest in the audience this evening. Representative Troy Waymaster from the big town of Bunker Hill, Kansas.
Senator, I think.
Appreciate having you here. Troy, please introduce yourself and your official title for the news media this evening.
My official title is Representative Troy Waymaster from Bunker Hill, Kansas. I represent the 109th Kansas House District, which includes 7 counties, the entire counties of Russell, Osborne, and Smith, and then portions of Jewell, Lincoln, Barton, and Rush counties. So it's great to be here. I want to thank the commissioners, and especially Commissioner Hazelhorst, for inviting me to address you this evening and answer any questions that you may have of the 2018 legislative session that we just concluded on May 4th. So I don't know if you have any questions about the legislative session, or you just kind of want to listen to my highlights and overview of what had transpired during the 2018 legislative session.
I think your highlights and overview would be a great start.
Okay. I would probably say the legislative session for 2018 started on October 2nd, 2017. And that was when the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that the school finance formula that we came up with in the 2017 legislative session to address the Gannon school finance case was deemed unconstitutional. So when October 2nd happened, there were many calls from leadership in both the House and the Senate to set up a special committee, and I always get the committee name wrong. It was a special committee on the decision for K through 12 education finance, or therefore somewhat like it. And actually, since I am the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for the House of Representatives, I was asked to serve on that committee, and we met 3 times. The first 2 meetings that we had basically was to go over the court docket back from the Kansas Supreme Court on why they decided that the school finance formula that we had created in 2017 was deemed unconstitutional. And then the third day was basically spent on remedies. And one of those remedies, because we did not fully have a grasp of what was going to occur monthly with the tax revenues that was passed when we actually overrode Governor Brown back on his veto. Basically, I call it a tax restructuring from the 2012 tax plan experiment. We did not know exactly what those numbers were going to look like, and so we had different agencies and departments come and address the committee and tell us what it would look like if we needed to sustain an 18% cut for those departments. And so we had higher ed, we had the Department of Corrections, we had the judicial branch, or just to name a few, come and address us as to what the ramifications would be if they would have to sustain an 18% cut in order to fulfill the court order from the Kansas Supreme Court. Some of those were pretty daunting. The judicial branch came back to us and said that they would have to have furlough days, lay court employees off, and basically not be able to provide simple court services for the individuals of the state of Kansas. The most scary alternative was from the Department of Corrections, where they said if they had to sustain an 18% cut across the board, they would have to close 3 prisons across the state of Kansas and release prisoners prior to their release date, which I have to question. Then we have a violation of our constitutional obligation of public safety. But that was some of the scenarios that were played out for us. Because I was the chairman of Appropriations in the 2017 legislative session, I also served as chairman of the Legislative Budget Interim Committee, which are members of the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. And we met periodically throughout the interim after we adjourned in the 2017 legislative session. And in our November meeting, we had some of the agencies and departments come before us and basically kind of give us what they had been anticipating as far as budget items that they might be requesting in 2018. However, we did not expect to have the amount of $274 million in additional spending that the agencies and departments were requesting. So when we started up in January, not only did we have the Education Budget Committee that reports up to the Appropriations Committee, as well as 5 other budget committees, but we also had to have all those budget committees sift through the governor's budget and have their own committee hearings and deliberations on whether or not those items were needed, warranted, whether it was just desired or a want list. And they reported that back to Appropriations. Then the Appropriations Committee then deemed whether or not those were items that we actually did need to fund, and we would question the Budget Committee chairman that would have to present back, which this year was pretty challenging, because usually in the second year in the budget cycle, it's not as hectic, because we passed the major budget in 2017. This year, it was just the second year of the biennium, so it's usually supposed to be a easier year. However, this year was a little bit different with all the requests that were coming from the agencies and departments. Obviously, with K through 12 education being the most topical thing that we discussed in the 2018 legislative session and how we were going to address that, we also did have some other major items. One of those involved the Kansas Department of Transportation. This was a maneuver that was implemented a few years ago to make it look like we were not spending as much in state general fund dollars. And so the allocation for K through 12 education transportation was actually, in a way, swept from the Kansas Department of Transportation, and this year we eliminated that. We allowed for KDOT to keep about $102 million within the Kansas Department of Transportation, as opposed to having that go towards K through 12 education finance, transportation. And that way they could secure and finalize some of the projects that they have for the T-Works project. As you know, T-Works started in about 2010. We're in the last few years of that. Given some of the budget constraints that we've had, KDOT has not been able to fulfill some of those projects. In fact, in 2016, they made the announcement that they were going to delay 23 projects indefinitely. They had no idea when they were going to start them up. So with that $102 million that was being kept in KDOT and not swept to K through 12 education transportation, we met with the department and wanted to have a finalized list of what projects from those 23 that were delayed would be the ones that they would most identify as being completed. One of the other things, and this was mainly on House position, that I fought vehemently for, because not only was it a strong position in our General Government Budget Committee, but also in appropriations on the House floor, and even within the Republican caucus, and that was, for years we've been hearing that our court employees are desperately underpaid. And last year with the state employee pay plan, I advocated for them then, and actually sectioned off the judicial employees, and they got a 2.5% increase. This year it came back because they were very much underpaid and very much under market. And so we came back, and the Senate did not have any position on that really whatsoever. And so in negotiations with the Senate, I did have to relent a little bit, but we were able to get a 5% increase for the non-judge staff, and then a 2% increase for all judges across the state of Kansas. The other item that we discussed, which actually the Senate did have a higher position than the House did, was back in 2016, when the governor needed to make a 4% across allotment in order to balance the books and bring it back to a zero balance. There was 4% that was cut from the institutions of higher learning. Obviously, that affected Fort Hays State University. Of approximately about $1 million was cut from them that year. And so this year, the Board of Regents and the institutions of higher learning came to us and wanted to have some type of a reinstatement made from those cuts that were made in 2016. And we were able to do about a 62.5% reinstatement of that. So what that means to Fort Hays State University is, I believe it was about $637,000 more that the university will receive this next fiscal year, starting on July 1st, than they had received in the two prior fiscal years. Those were, off the top of my mind, some of the things that we discussed. One of the other big items on a state level that was a topic very early on, and actually last year I had the opportunity to tour the Osawatomie State Hospital and also the Lansing Correctional Facility. And I don't know if any of you have been to Lansing, but it is a Obviously, it's a correctional facility, so it's not necessarily a happy environment. But you could tell that there was a lot of inadequacies, and there was a lot of overstaffing just because of the way the setup of the buildings were. In fact, the one that was questioned highly was actually the correctional facility that was built in Lansing in about the 1980s, and it was in a pod format. Well, you needed to have twice as much correctional staff in order to monitor that particular facility because of all the different hallways that would lead to the different pods and how it was constructed. And so there was actually the State Finance Council, which I'm a member on. We heard from a group out of Tennessee who would basically lease a contract with the state of Kansas. It's a 20-year lease. So we'd have a lease option to purchase, and they would maintain the building. We would have our correctional staff in it, and because the new facility would go in at Lansing with the same amount of inmates, we would be able to save money off of the correctional staff and pay for the lease payment. And so we voted in favor of that early on in the legislative session. There was some criticism behind that. But actually, financially, it made sense by being able to reduce our correctional staff and paying for a new facility, because the oldest facility on Lansing was actually built during the Lincoln administration in 1863. And that's actually not the building that was in question. It was the one that was built in the 1980s. But actually, just looking at the buildings on that facility, there did need to be some upgrades made to that particular correctional facility. And then I kind of mentioned that I did a tour of Osawatomie as well last year, and one thing that we've been trying to do, not only with Osawatomie, but also with Larned State Hospital, because they were kind of following into the same path that Osawatomie had a couple of years ago with decertification. And we had just gotten Osawatomie recertified in December of 2017, and then we found out that Larned may be on the precipice of being decertified. And so the Appropriations Committee and in the budget, we made sure that there was enough money going into Osawatomie and to Larned State and Parsons State Hospital that they would not run the risk of decertification, which would actually end up costing the state more money than if we just spend the money up front and make sure that those institutions do not become decertified. So those are kind of the highlights that I can think of off the top of my mind. I'm sure there are many that will surface later. But I would open up to any questions that you may have of the 2018 legislative session, or...
Well, you have two members behind you that are members of the court staff, Amanda Truen and Judge Brown, so I'm sure they already know all your good news, but I'm sure they're excited what you've been working on, so.
I hope they're excited.
He got lots of text messages.
Well, that's good.
That I did. Text messages, emails, phone calls, you name it, I got it.
How many different committees do you sit on, Troy?
Technically, I just sit on the one.
Okay.
Since I'm the chairman of Appropriations, that's the Budget Committee for the House, which means I had to give up my seat on the Ag and Natural Resources
Yeah,
Budget
okay.
Committee.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I enjoyed serving on that committee for the first 4 years that I was in the legislature, and then I advocated for the Appropriations Chairman position, and the first thing the Speaker, who was running at the time, he wasn't Speaker yet, but he asked me, he was the former Appropriations Chairman, and he goes, I just have to ask, why do you want this? and I said, well, I want to be part of the solution. And so even though I had to give up other committee posts that I served on, Appropriations is the only committee that I serve on. But during the interim, I do serve on the Legislative Budget Committee, and then I also serve on the State Finance Council, which is leadership of the House and the Senate, and then the chairperson for Senate Ways and Means, which is my equivalent on the Senate side, and then myself on the Appropriations.
Questions, ladies? Barb?
We visited just a little bit before, and I just, I feel badly for your frustration with the courts giving this edict that we're not spending enough on school financing, and you not knowing what number it is. What is the general feel amongst legislators in that issue, on that issue?
Well, that could be broken down into many different ideologies. You could have some that say we're not spending enough. You have some that are saying, well, we're pretty close. You'll have others saying we're spending way too much. You look at where K through 12 education budget, or where the 12 education budget is right now. Prior to what we passed this last legislative session, it was about 52% of the state budget. Now that over the next 5 years, we're going to be phasing in approximately over $500 million into K through 12 education, you're looking at it nearing 56, 58% of the state budget. So what does that mean? It simply means is that we have less dollars that are going to other services for the state of Kansas. And as you kind of mentioned, the frustration of not knowing what the dollar amount is, and the court is very careful on that because they don't want to look like an appropriator, so they don't want to say a dollar amount. They'll just deem whether or not what the legislature does is constitutional or not. Now, many will say that in order to be constitutional, you have to fully fund the school finance formula, but that's an enigma. What is fully funding it? I mean, you could go back to the Montoy decision in 2005, which was a different school finance formula, and saying, well, it says in statute what the amount is there, but now we had block grant funding that occurred in 2015, and then now you have a new school finance formula, so does that precede what happened with the Montoy case? And to be quite honest, it was the non-funding of the school finance formula after addressing the Montoy case where the litigation came back in about 2010, 2011, based off of Montoy. Now, I will say I did testify in favor in front of the Judicial Committee on the House side in favor of looking at a constitutional amendment change. And many claim that because I testified in favor of that, it was basically saying I was anti-education, and that couldn't be farther from the truth, because I'm a product of public education. I mean, I attended Russell High School, graduated in 1996. I attended the University of Kansas. I mean, so I've been and I also pursued my MBA with Fort Hays State University. So I've always been in the public education system. What I'm looking at is all the other obligations that the state has. And if we have that much dedicated to K through 12, because of some elusive language in the Constitution that's being interpreted differently by some individuals, maybe we need to tighten the language in the Constitution. And I've had a lot of constituents that have come back and said, yes, we would have liked to have voted on that. How did it pass the House? And I said, it didn't. It never came for a vote because we didn't have the 2/3 majority.
Right.
So I did speak in favor of a constitutional amendment change. Now, the language that was before the Judiciary Committee at the time that I testified did say in my testimony that I did not particularly like the language before them, but I leave it up to their knowledge to come up with language that I would somehow be fine with. But I was, in theory, in favor of a constitutional change, just so we can end the constant litigation that has been going on for 40 years.
Bogged down the legislature.
And I'm just thinking about the millions of dollars we have spent in litigation, just given the last 2 court cases. And in fact, my entire 6 years with the legislature, we have been dealing with the Gannon education lawsuit. And I don't know how many different remedies we have come up with that have, I mean, they've actually been approved by the court as far as on the term of equity. But the adequacy part is the piece that seems to have the biggest hang-up. But then when we did the block grant funding, which I did not vote in favor of that, because I felt it was very foolhardy to basically throw away the entire school finance formula when we're in pending litigation and freeze the funds to K through 12 education, and that's why I voted against it. And I had many members of leadership upset with me because I did not cast a yay vote. But I was only, in a way, kind of, I don't know, it just kind of emphasized my vote when the Supreme Court came back and said the block grant funding was unconstitutional. And so then we had to go back and create a school finance formula again, which, to be quite honest, may have different names and titles, but it is similar to the education finance formula we had prior to the block grant funding.
Great job.
Very interesting. Marcy or Barbara,
I
you
have no
done?
questions.
Huh?
I don't have any questions.
Bill, anything to add? Asking? Go ahead.
That's a Pandora's
Just,
box.
I'm just wondering if there's going to be a special session this summer.
Well, there are some that contend there will be. There are some, as myself, that I hope there won't be. Just because the Supreme Court has until June 30th to render their opinion whether or not the amount of dollars that we put additionally into K through 12 education will pass their decision. And one thing, I'm in harvest during that time. I'm wheat harvest. And my dad is not going to be particularly happy if I have to leave and go to a special session. That being said, also, I recall many members who were in the legislature in 2005 when they had to address Montoy in July. And they said that was the most miserable 2 weeks of their life. Because, it was hot and humid and everybody was mad because they were back up there. And I've already been in 2 special sessions. One was in regards to education, and the other was in regards to criminal punishment. We had to go back for the hard 50. And even though those lasted a few days, it was not pleasant. And I feel that if we'd have to go back to a special session, this would last quite a bit longer than a few days.
It would.
And I'm just hoping that the state, because that was one of the arguments when the Supreme Court made their opinion back on October 2nd, and we found out later when we resumed session during the legislature in January, was that the state did not present our case very well. And so I'm hoping that we do a better job of presenting to the Supreme Court the rationale and the reasons why these amount of dollars are going into education finance, and I'm hoping that we do not find ourselves in a special session. But when I was leaving on May 4th, there are many that were saying, well, I'll see you in a couple months. So they're already anticipating a special session, but I hope we don't.
So who is ultimately responsible for transmitting that information properly?
Well, the Attorney General had asked for the legislature to have a new school finance formula by March 1st, which, for him being a former senator, he should know that that's nearly impossible to have a new school finance formula generated within 2 months. Because that would have given him ample time to analyze the formula, go through all the evidence, the reasons why we put this amount in here and this amount and this avenue of spending, until he had to return it into the Supreme Court on April 30th. And then the Supreme Court would review it until June 30th and then render their opinion. Well, we didn't give it to him until April 7th. And so his team was then working frantically to get everything in place. And then also, since it passed and was signed by the governor, it went to the Department of Education, and then that's when the Department of Education realized this $60 to $80 million mistake, is probably the best way to put it, where we had to come back when we came back at the end of April and address that. And so then there was an extension made
Right.
from the Attorney General. It was a request, which was granted, and then they finally turned everything over to, I think oral arguments started this week, I believe, or next week. in regards
Let's
to
hope
that.
they do a better job.
Huh?
Let's hope they do a better job of representing.
Well, and one of the things that was kind of surprising is that the House committee last year, during the 2017 legislative session, was very careful on, making sure we had all the transcripts, all testimony, everything in place. somehow it didn't get relayed over. And I can't answer that question as to how or why it did not.
Okay.
Well, Troy, thank you very much for coming.
All right.
Thank you.
We appreciate your work.
Having me, and
Site, and if we can, we'd like to invite you back again down the road. Like to have you back again for another update.
that's fine with me. So, thank you.
That's great. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Mr. Stacy Campbell. Extension update.
Stacy Campbell, Cottonwood Extension District Agriculture Agent. Thanks for having me here this evening. The last time I gave a report was January the 8th, so I guess I'll kind of pick up from the 9th of January and highlight a few programs that we've had. As you know, kind of wintertime is a busy time for us. That's when we're able to have some winter programs for the ag producers, so we tried to do that. We had a cover crop for weed suppression and grazing program, both in Great Bend and Hayes in the first part of January. And those programs went over especially well. There's still interest and a lot of questions in that area. We have a lady at K-State who's been doing some good work with doing some weed suppression with cover crops and has seen some good results. So she showed that research and kind of talked about how you go about that. You have to figure out what weed you're after and try to get something growing before then to compete with it, and it kind of highlighted some of the main things, the goals you need to look at if you're going to set that into motion. And like I said, we had that program in both counties the same day, so a busy day, but we did have good attendance. And then the Cover Your Acres Conference and Winter Conference in Oberlin is something Extension does every year that brings hundreds of producers together here in western Kansas, western Nebraska, eastern Colorado. Extension puts that program on. A lot of the agents go and help do that, so that was something that I went and helped again do this year. 2-day conference, same program both days. Making good decisions with agmanager.info. That's a good website we have that the Ag Economics Department has, and there's budgets. There's a lot of different things on that website, different decision tools, basically spreadsheets that guys can put their numbers into, and it'll kind of tell them if it's something that they may or may not want to pursue. And so had a program on that. Farmers don't like doing budgets and numbers, so it didn't have a real great turnout, but the ones that were there were interested. As a matter of fact, we only had 7 or 8 that really showed up, so my specialist from K-State, we just did it over Zoom, but it worked really well, and that's probably kind of something down the road we'll have to do more as resources and, get shorter probably on campus and so forth with, as we heard, budgetary cuts that are far-reaching to many organizations. So, but it went good. The program did, and we were able to interact with him and if we had any questions and so forth. Then we had a spring crops update here in Hayes. Then the following day we had a weed control and field crops update in Great Bend. We had a full house there at the American Ag Credit. Obviously, weed control is still a big issue in our no-till farming system as we get more weeds that are getting harder to control. We had a Preserving the Family with Estate Planning program in Great Bend. We kind of do a couple of those in the region each year, and we had one in Great Bend this year. Those programs are good. A lot of us, know we've got to kind of do some estate planning, but we kind of keep lagging in doing that, and so this program is kind of an effort to get those people, I guess, if you will, kick-started, and we've done some follow-up evaluations 6 months later, and it's been nice to hear some people say, that's what I need, we went forward and we did a plan, or we're working on a plan, we got in touch with an attorney, so we kind of give them some tools to where they feel more comfortable in going forward and trying to start that process. A canola meeting in Great Bend, there's some interest further south of here in that. I did take 2 producers with me, and I know them well enough on the way home. After they heard everything, I said, so you guys, you think you're going to grow canola? And I kind of knew the answer. They were like, I don't think so. But to me, that's a success because at least they know, well, there's a little more to this than what I thought. Instead of jumping into it, they decided they'd probably wait on that. So, and we noticed too there, Elish, the agent down there who knows many more of the producers, I asked her, did you recognize very many faces? And she said no. So they were probably guys a little further even south of Great Bend. But there is some interest in Great Bend. There's a few guys growing them. Actually, the co-op there had wanted us to maybe try to pursue that program, so we did. We had a farm safety program out at the experiment station this year. We haven't had that in about 3 years. That's for high school FFA kids to come, and we do some farm safety and show them. Well, we always show some gory slides of actual farm safety accidents, but I think that's good. That shock factor gets their attention. We usually do that right before lunch, then they don't eat as much pizza. No. This year I think we didn't do it right before lunch, but some years we do. But that's always a good program. As a matter of fact, my next radio program in Great Bend is going to be about, farm safety and all the fatalities among children. There's a lot of kids that are involved in, fatalities and accidents on the farm because obviously kids are very involved in the farm and helping do the work and stuff. So, okay, I'll hurry up and wrap up here. The Great Bend Farm and Ranch Show, I went and helped with that. We have a booth there, Extension does, so it was just good to get to meet some people and visit with folks. We had a wheat freeze assessment meeting here recently and in Great Bend. Didn't really see much in the way of freeze damage, which I guess is good, but I know our wheat was further behind this year, but it got cold enough. I guess I thought it might be worth having, so we did do that, and we got some samples in, not a lot. Had a tractor safety course that we offer each year in Hill City for kids that are going to be working on farms. By federal law, if they're under 16, they're supposed to have a tractor safety course, and we offered that, and had about 22 kids there, I believe. Took about 3 from Ellis County. What else? There was a composting school that K-State did here last week. It was more for municipalities, but they did a part of it on composting dead animals. And we actually went out to a producer here who has a small growing yard, and they're doing that. And that was good for, there was another person there from a feedlot that's just kind of getting started, and I think they got some useful information on how to do that if they're going to jump into that. We have the experiment station has their wheat day coming up May 22nd. Barton County wheat plot is May 24th. The Ellis County wheat plot is May 31st. And Barton County's been getting more rain, so the things are going better down there than they are here. Our wheat's going to be pretty short in stature and I think volume this year. So it's really been pushing ahead here lately, pretty short.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, sorry about that. And then just kind of the usual stuff we do in the media, try to do a weekly newspaper article. Kind of been emphasizing weed control quite a bit here lately. Radio program monthly with KUIS, and also we're doing one down in Great Bend now with their AM station, and try to send out some emails on an as-needed basis to producers on a few timely things when I can get that done. So, any questions?
No, sounds like you've been busy.
It's been pretty busy. Yep.
What time is your wheat plot tour in Ellis County?
6 o'clock, and it's at the usual area there with the coons on Fairground Road, actually right beside Leon's house.
Sure.
Yeah, we kind of put it to the acid test this year, Dean. We put it in after corn because that was about all that worked in his rotation. So
Yeah.
it's a little thin.
I drove by it just the other day.
Yeah. So
Did he say the 23rd?
31st.
31st for
Right?
Okay.
31st for Ellis and the 24th for Barton. And then the experiment station every other year they have their wheat day, and that's the 22nd.
Okay,
So-
that's where I got that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Stacy.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bill Ring and the Mayor of Victoria, if he'd like to come up. Paving assistance request from the City of Victoria.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bill Ring, Public Works Director.
John Schulte, Mayor of Victoria.
Hi, John.
Thank you.
As you saw in your packet, you've got a letter of request from the City of Victoria asking for paving assistance. This is something we've been doing for years. Same thing we agreed to do for the City of Ellis and the City of Hayes this year. And I asked the mayor to come along tonight in case you had any questions. but staff is recommending that we continue to work with the city, and basically, they're going to provide the materials as I laid out, and we'll be bringing equipment and some labor from our crews.
These questions?
We always rely on you to tell us if you can do it, and we think you should do it if you can get it done.
Okay.
Thanks for coming over. It's just sitting through the meeting, waiting for us to say yes. That's great.
Thank you. We'll assist them.
Do you want me to make the motion?
Please.
I move that the commission approve the Public Works Department providing assistance to the city of Victoria with both equipment and labor. The city of Victoria will furnish the oil and the rock.
And I will second that written
Don?
motion.
Donna, we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries 3-0. Next item, our county administrator, revised chief elected official board agreement at county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. County Administrator Philip Smith Haynes. So this is relating to our participation in Local Workforce Development Area 1, or what's better known as Kansas Workforce 1. Commissioner McClelland actually sits on this chief elected official board. We're one of 62 counties. This agreement was originally signed about 2 years ago, but they Kansas Workforce One has been informed of some needed changes, and so they're sending it back out to all 62 counties, requesting your adoption and a signature from the commission chair, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay. I move the commission approve the revised chief elected official board agreement for the local workforce development area and authorize the chair to sign on behalf of Ellis County.
And I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second for the agreement. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Donna?
I did have a question. What's been the most notable accomplishment of this body in the last year?
Bringing the jobs to the people. They have job fairs in different areas in the 62 counties, probably 3 or 4 times through the year, and finding out that we have jobs and we have people, but we don't have people that are suited for the jobs because they don't have the education or the specialization that they need. So basically, this is to try to get this together and educate the people. The WIOA board is made up of several manufacturing facilities, several other businesses that meet with the chief elected officials. So they discuss different directions for that.
Okay.
Marcy? County Councilor, Mr. Bill Jeter.
County Councilor Bill Jeter, I have no report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. County Administrator report.
County Administrator Philip Smith Haynes. I just had one item that I wanted to call to the Commission's attention, and that is the fact that last week, Ellis County Emergency Management successfully installed safe sheds at both our Public Works shop location and our landfill. Haven't seen the one out at 280th yet, but I did view the one at the landfill this afternoon, and they are sturdy little bunkers for our staff to be protected in the event of severe weather. And the landfill actually has already started decorating theirs with some chairs that they found in the landfill. So that's a long time coming to have that kind of storm protection for our
Absolutely.
employees. So we appreciate the work of both Public Works and Emergency Management.
Thank you very much. County Commission reports, Barb.
I have nothing right now, although I would like to make a comment about the landfill, that if you have not been out there lately, it's not a bad idea to go out because it doesn't look anything like it did before. It's been, our new landfill director has done an excellent job, Bern Reuter. So
Definitely a
It's no
change.
surprise to me that he's resurrected some things out of the landfill to take care of things, so kudos. And thank you, Bill.
Barb. Marcy?
I was on the radio and then all of us attended the ribbon cutting at the health department, which was a great occasion.
It was.
One more
It was
feather.
wonderful.
That's right. That's all I had to report to is the ribbon cutting, and thank you all for attending that made it out there, department heads, elected officials, and the public, and the chamber, and city of Hayes, and what a great day again. Thank you all for being there. Any executive sessions? No?
Where's our EMS guy?
I think still visiting with David. If nothing else, we will adjourn at 5:50.
Okay.
Thank you all.